How are you all doing? We are having a cloudy, it was a little bit drizzly day today, but I think that part is clearing up. Hope you're having a wonderful day. Hope you had a wonderful weekend. We had a weekend celebrating two birthdays in our family, and so it was a good weekend this weekend. So excuse me, we're at a pivotal point in the book of Colossians, and Paul is following his typical pattern of how he writes letters to individuals and churches. And that's that he spends the very first part talking about things that we ought to believe. And then in the second part, he talks about how we ought to live. And it's interesting the pattern that he uses because he always starts with what you should believe. It got me thinking, like, have you thought about what you believe today? I mean, likely not. It's not something we like typically say, oh, I'm going to sit down Monday morning. What do I believe? I believe this, and this. We don't typically do that. But what you believe is critically important because right believing should lead to right living. It doesn't always. The human heart is so defiled by sin that sometimes we believe the right things and we still do the wrong things. But as a general pattern, that God intended, and that's why he had Paul write his letters the way he did, is right belief leads to right living. Right living does not lead to right belief. I was thinking about that this morning, about how I've known so many people that live a good life, but don't believe the right things. And in some ways, the more you live a good life, apart from believing the right things, the more or the less likely you are to actually believe the right things because you become more and more self-focused on yourself and begin to believe that you are sufficient in and of yourself to do it. But you're not, nor am I. And so Paul has spent two chapters in Colossians, two chapters establishing the right things to believe. At the very beginning of Colossians 3, the first four verses that we've looked at over the past two podcasts, and maybe this will be the final one today that we look at, maybe not. Paul is kind of summing things up and giving us right belief because he's immediately after this just going to start jumping in, talking about the way you ought to live as a result of believing the right thing. So let's get into it. Colossians chapter 3, verses 1 to 4. And remember, this is an answer to this, but they talking about believing the wrong things, but they lack any value in restraining sensual indulgence. So here's his summary. Since you have been raised with Christ, this is referencing Jesus' death and resurrection on the cross and his burial in the tomb, and then he's resurrected. This is looking back to that, even though he doesn't come right out and say it. This is what he's pointing us to. Since you have been raised with Christ, set your hearts on things above, where Christ is, seated at the right hand of God. These are important things to believe. And Jesus died and rose again, and he's sitting at the right hand of God. Set your minds, put it on your mind on the right path. Set your mind on things above, not on earthly things. Here's more for you and I to believe. For you died, and your life is now hidden with Christ in God. When Christ, who is your life, appears, then you will also appear with him in glory. Boy, there's a lot going on in those few words, in those two verses. You died, and your life is now hidden with Christ. You, if you are a follower, a believer in Jesus Christ, your gift of eternal life you have forever. You can never lose it. In the book of John, uh, Jesus uses the illustration of hands, and he says, "You are in my hand, and nothing can pluck you out of my hand." Jesus says, and on top of that, my hand is in the Father's hand, and so nothing. And that includes you and I. Nothing can take us out of the hand of Jesus. Nothing can take us out of the hand of the Father. In Ephesians, Paul talks about how the Spirit of God is like a stamp that seals an envelope and guarantees its delivery. It was part of the Roman postal system back then, that when certain envelopes were sealed with wax, and then an imprint was put on it, it was a guarantee that that letter would get to where it's going, which is kind of ironic right now for those of us living in Canada, because we just went through another Canadian postal strike, and now we're on a revolving postal strike. So there is no guarantee that your mail's ever going to get where it's supposed to get on any regular basis. But in Ephesians, Paul's talking about the Spirit of God Himself guarantees your home in heaven one day. You don't have to fuss and worry about that fact. Your life is hidden with Christ, and you will appear with Him in glory. There is no doubt about that. It also points our hearts and lives to looking forward, that God's plan for you and I, for humanity, for this earth is not finished yet. This earth is a mess. Everywhere you look, things are a mess. We have a ceasefire in the Middle East where the host uh, people, as part of the ceasefire, started shooting their own people. It's a crazy, crazy mess, this world. There's all kinds of stuff going on all over in our world, but God is not finished yet. There is a future glory coming from heaven to earth in the form of Jesus, and we are intimately bound to that. These are important, important things to believe and to consider on a regular basis. My life is Christ's life. His life is my life. I no longer belong to myself. Your life is now hidden with Christ. When Christ, who is your life is hidden in Him, His life has now become your life. Jesus is not an add-on to your life. He's not an extra boost to get you over the top. He's not a lovely landing spot when you fall in life. He is your life, and He is my life. These are important things to believe. So before Paul ever gets into how should I live, he spends 2 chapters talking about these things, and he sums it up in these 4 verses. Now, I'd like us to just briefly consider, in our time left, this actually appears quite a few times throughout the scriptures, this idea that your life is built on what you believe. In First Timothy chapter 4, Timothy was a young, we call him young minister, pastor, uh, closely associated with Paul. Paul has mentored Timothy. He's written him a letter. He's giving him advice on how to do ministry, but even more importantly, he keeps giving him advice on how to live his life. And in 1 Timothy 4:16, he says this: watch your life and doctrine closely. Persevere in them, because if you do, you will save both yourself and your hearers. Did you catch that? Watch your life and your doctrine. What you believe, if you believe the right things, it should lead to right living. Don't try to do right living apart from right believing. If you are a seasoned follower of Jesus, you've been doing this a long time, persevere in it. Don't give up on it. Don't get lazy. Don't get unfocused. I've gone through periods of my life where that kind of sets in for a little bit, and you have to, by God's grace, shake yourself out of that. And the way I always get back out of it, if I'm starting to drift, is I go back to the basic things that I believe. And I listen, I read the scriptures right here or I listen to a podcast that points my heart back to Jesus and the things that I ought to believe about Jesus. Watch your life and watch your doctrine closely. Doctrine is what you believe. That's simply all it is. So watch those two things carefully. So that's my word for you today. I hope that encourages your heart. And I think on Wednesday, Lord willing, we're going to jump into it. It's going to come hot and heavy, the things that we ought to, the way we ought to behave as a result of what we're believing. But between now and then, think about what you believe, and I hope you have a good couple of days.